Tourist provokes Royal Guard with hot tea. The aftermath is shocking flush crown. It was a warm Tuesday morning in London when Marcus Reed stepped off the double-decker bus near Buckingham Palace. He had flown in from Toronto the night before, and this was the moment he had been talking about for months, seeing the famous King's Guard up close. He had his camera ready, his tourist map folded awkwardly in one hand, and a large takeaway cup of tea in the other, still steaming from the cafe around the corner. The palace gates stood tall and golden in the morning light. Tourists from all over the world had already gathered along the railings, pressing their faces against the metal bars, pointing at the immovable soldiers in their tall black bearskin hats and deep red uniforms. The guards stood like statues, their eyes fixed forward, their faces completely blank. No blinking, no smiling, no reaction. Marcus had watched videos about these guards online. He knew they were not supposed to react to anything. That was the whole point. He had seen clips of people making funny faces, dancing in front of them, even crying dramatically, and the guards never moved a single muscle. It looked almost unreal, like mannequins placed in uniforms. He had laughed at those videos back home, but standing here now, looking at a real guard just a few feet away, something else stirred in him. Not respect, not wonder, something more like a dare. He turned to the couple standing next to him, a pair of newlyweds from Australia named Dane and Sophie. They were snapping photos with a professional camera and seemed far more interested in getting the perfect shot than in talking to strangers. But Marcus nudged Dane anyway and nodded toward the guard. "Watch this," he said quietly, with a grin that should have warned anyone nearby that nothing good was about to happen. What Marcus did not know, and what he had clearly never bothered to learn before his trip, was that the King's Guard are not props. They are not part of a tourist attraction in the way a theme park character is. These are fully trained soldiers, active military personnel, men and women who have gone through intense training, who carry real weapons, and who are operating under a strict and serious set of rules. The ceremonial uniform is real. The duty is real. The authority is absolutely real. But Marcus was not thinking about any of that. He was thinking about the video he was about to make for his social media page, which had around 4,000 followers and had never gone properly viral. He had been trying for a while to get a big moment, something funny or shocking that people would share. And standing this close to a guard who could not react, holding a hot cup of tea that was practically begging to be used as a prop, the idea formed in his mind like a bad joke telling itself. He moved closer to the railing. The guard was posted just on the other side, completely still, staring ahead with that iron focus that made it feel like he was looking through everything rather than at anything. Marcus held up his teacup and leaned toward the railing. He began to tip the cup, very slowly, letting the steam rise between them. He was not quite close enough to spill it directly on the guard. The railing kept him back, but he let some of the liquid drip down the outside of the cup, letting it splatter near the guard's polished boots. A few tourists nearby gasped. A child pulled at her mother's sleeve. Sophie grabbed her husband's arm, and Marcus grinned at the camera on his phone, which Dane had nervously agreed to hold just 30 seconds earlier, not fully understanding what Marcus had planned. For about 3 seconds, nothing happened. The guard stood perfectly still, and Marcus, encouraged by the silence, leaned in even closer and made a mock-surprised face at the camera, as if he could not believe the guard was not reacting. He said something under his breath, something careless and mocking, and tilted the cup further. That was when everything changed. Not with a shout, not with a sudden dramatic movement, but with a single, sharp, powerful voice that cut through the morning air like a blade and made every single person within earshot freeze completely. The voice came from the guard himself, and it was nothing like what Marcus had expected. He had imagined, if he had imagined anything at all, that the guard might quietly signal for help or give a small stern look. What he got instead was a shout so loud, so precise, and so completely without warning that Marcus stumbled backward and nearly dropped both his phone and his tea. The guard had not turned his head. He had not broken his standing position in any dramatic way. but his voice had exploded outward with the kind of command that is drilled into soldiers through years of training. It was the official verbal warning that guards are permitted to give when a member of the public is interfering with their duty, and every syllable of it landed like a hammer. Marcus froze. His grin disappeared in an instant. The Australian couple stepped back automatically, as if the shout had physically pushed them. Several other tourists also stepped away from the railing, and a ripple of startled murmurs moved through the small crowd that had gathered. A few people laughed nervously. One elderly man put his hand over his heart. But Marcus was not laughing. He was staring at the guard with wide eyes and flushed cheeks, the teacup now hanging loosely at his side, dripping onto the pavement. His phone, still being held by Dane, was still recording. And that detail, the fact that everything had been captured, would matter enormously in the hours to come. For a moment, nothing happened. The guard returned to his forward stare, rigid and unblinking, as if the past 10 seconds had not occurred at all. That absolute stillness after such a sudden burst of authority was somehow more unnerving than the shout itself. It made Marcus feel very small and very stupid in a way that he was not used to feeling. He tried to recover. He turned back toward Dane with a shaky laugh and reached for his phone. "Did you get that?" he asked, his voice not quite as confident as it had been. Dane handed the phone back without a word, his expression somewhere between amused and deeply uncomfortable. Sophie had already started walking away, pulling her camera strap tight over her shoulder like she wanted nothing to do with whatever was about to unfold. What none of them had noticed yet was that 2 other figures had been watching the whole thing from a position further along the palace wall. These were Metropolitan Police officers assigned to the area around Buckingham Palace, and they had seen exactly what happened. One of them had already pressed the radio clip to his vest. Marcus was still standing at the railing, scrolling through the footage on his phone with shaking hands, when he heard footsteps approaching. He looked up and saw the 2 officers walking toward him with the kind of calm, purposeful stride that does not suggest a friendly conversation. The taller one spoke first, asking Marcus to step away from the railing and accompany them. Marcus blinked. He looked around at the tourists nearby, many of whom had stopped pretending not to stare. He laughed again, that nervous, deflecting laugh people use when they are hopping something as a joke. "I was just messing around," he said. "I didn't actually touch him. It was just tea." The officer did not smile. He repeated the request, and this time his tone made it absolutely clear that it was not a request at all. Marcus, realizing that the situation had become something quite different from a funny social media moment, put his phone in his pocket and followed the officers away from the railing, away from the crowd, and toward a quieter section of the pavement where a very serious and very uncomfortable conversation was about to begin. Back at the railing, the guard continued to stand in perfect stillness, as if Marcus Reed had never existed. But the crowd around the spot where it had happened buzzed with energy. Phones were out. People were talking. And somewhere in that crowd, at least 3 different people had filmed the entire thing from beginning to end, and were already typing captions. The officers spoke to Marcus for nearly 20 minutes. They explained, in very direct terms, what he had done and why it was a problem. Deliberately approaching a king's guard with the intent to provoke or interfere is not just a matter of rudeness. It falls under specific laws relating to the obstruction of persons in the course of their public duty. The guards protect a working royal residence. This is not a tourist performance. Any attempt to distract, intimidate, or interfere with that duty, even through something as seemingly harmless as spilling tea near a guard's boots, can be treated as a serious matter. Marcus listened, or at least he performed the act of listening, which involved a lot of nodding and saying, "Yeah," and "I understand," in a tone that did not fully convince either officer that he did. He kept glancing at his phone. He kept almost saying something about how it was not really that serious, and then stopping himself when he saw the officer's expression. In the end, he was not arrested. He was given a formal warning, his details were taken down, and he was told very clearly that if he returned to the area and repeated this behavior, the outcome would be very different. The officers watched him walk away, and one of them spoke briefly into his radio before turning back toward the palace gates. Marcus walked 3 blocks before he stopped, sat down on a bench near St. James's Park, and pulled out his phone. He was shaking slightly, not from cold, because the morning had turned warm, but from the aftershock of a situation that had gone so far beyond what he had imagined. He opened the footage that Dane had recorded. He watched it from the beginning. Even to his own eyes it looked bad. The grinning face, the tilted cup, the steam rising between him and the guard, the frozen moment of confidence just before the shout, and then the shout itself loud and sudden and completely justified, and his own startled stumble backward. He watched it 3 times. On the 3rd viewing, he understood something that he had not fully processed until that moment. This video, exactly as it was going to spread. It was already the kind of content that people share, not because it made him look funny, but because it made him look foolish, careless, and disrespectful in front of something that millions of people genuinely admire. He thought about deleting it. He held his thumb over the file for a long moment, but he had already sent the raw footage to himself from Dane's phone, and he knew that Dane had it too. He also knew that several strangers in that crowd had been filming. The moment was not his to delete. Back at his hotel that evening, he opened his social media to find that someone had already posted a clip. Not from Dane's angle, but from a stranger who had been standing about 10 feet to the left. This clip showed everything: the approach, the tea, the warning shout, and most damning of all, Marcus's grinning face in the seconds before it happened, making it absolutely clear that this was deliberate. The caption read, "Tourist thinks it's funny to mess with the king's guard. The guard had other ideas." The post had been up for 6 hours. It had already been shared over 40,000 times. Marcus sat on the edge of his hotel bed and read the comments. There were thousands of them. Some were funny, in the way internet comments always find a way to be funny even about serious things. But most were not. Most were angry. People from the UK were particularly vocal. There was a deep vein of genuine national offense running through the comments, a feeling that a guest had come into someone's home and deliberately mocked something that mattered. There were veterans in the comments. There were people who knew someone in the household division. There were historians explaining the tradition and the meaning of the guard duty in terms that made Marcus's little stunt feel even smaller and meaner than it already did. He put his phone face down on the bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time. The room was quiet except for the sound of London outside the window, buses, pigeons, the distant bark of a dog. Somewhere out there, his face was on thousands of screens, and the night, it turned out, had only just begun. By morning, the story had moved beyond social media and into the press. A journalist from a mid-sized British news outlet had picked it up, and the article, complete with screenshots from the video and a short piece about the laws surrounding interference with royal guards, had been read over 200,000 times by 9 in the morning. By noon, 2 more outlets had covered it. By the afternoon, a Canadian newspaper had found Marcus's name through his social media accounts and published a short piece identifying him. Marcus found out about this while sitting in a cafe, attempting to eat a breakfast that he no longer had any appetite for. His phone had been ringing and buzzing nonstop since he woke up. His mother had called twice. His best friend back in Toronto had sent a message asking if he was okay. His work colleague had sent a link to the Canadian article with no message attached, which somehow felt worse than anything else. He opened the article with trembling fingers. His name, his city, his job title: he worked in customer relations for a mid-sized tech company. The article was not cruel, it was just factual, but seeing his real name attached to the story changed something in his chest in a way he could not describe. This was no longer just a moment on a stranger's phone. This was now a documented event with his identity attached to it. He called his manager before his manager could call him. That conversation lasted 11 minutes. It was professional and calm, and deeply unpleasant in the specific way that conversations are unpleasant when both people are pretending to be calm. His manager said they would need to talk when he was back. He said he understood. He hung up and sat with his cold eggs and stared out at the London street. Meanwhile, back at the palace, something else was quietly unfolding. The footage had been reviewed by the relevant palace security team as a matter of standard procedure. The formal warning issued by the Metropolitan Police had been logged, and the guard who had been at the center of the incident, a 24-year-old soldier from Yorkshire named in some reports only as Corporal D, had continued his duty that morning exactly as he would any other morning. He had not complained. He had not given any interviews. He had simply returned to his post when his rotation came around, stood in the same spot where the incident had occurred, and resumed his duty with the same immovable focus as always. That detail, the quiet, unbroken professionalism of the guard, became the part of the story that people responded to most powerfully. As the video continued to circulate and the comment sections grew, a counter-narrative began to emerge alongside the criticism of Marcus. People started talking not about what Marcus had done wrong, but about what the guard had done right. Veterans explained what it takes to maintain that level of discipline under provocation. Former Household Division soldiers shared what the training involves, what the mindset requires, what it means to stand that post in rain, in heat, in full public view, day after day, with complete composure. Someone created a short clip that combined the original footage with a caption that simply read, "He didn't flinch. He didn't need to." It spread even faster than the original. The guard, without doing anything except his job, had become the story. And Marcus, who had wanted to go viral, found that he had succeeded in the worst possible way, as the person who had tried and completely failed to rattle someone who was simply too disciplined, too trained, and too professional to be rattled. That evening, Marcus sat in his hotel room and wrote something. It started as a defensive statement in his head, a long explanation of what he had been thinking, why it was not as bad as it looked, how he had not meant any real disrespect. But the longer he sat with it, the more hollow those words sounded, even to himself. He had meant to provoke. He had grinned at the camera. He had enjoyed for about 3 seconds the idea that he was getting away with something. Those 3 seconds were visible in the footage, and no explanation would change what they looked like. He deleted the draft. He started again. This time he did not try to explain himself. He just tried to say something true. The next morning, he posted a short statement to his social media accounts. It was 4 sentences long. It acknowledged what he had done, acknowledged that it was disrespectful, acknowledged the professionalism of the guard and the seriousness of the duty he had interrupted, and apologized not to avoid consequences, but because he had actually spent a full, sleepless night sitting with the weight of what the footage showed him about himself. He did not ask people to forgive him. He did not try to be funny. He just said what needed to be said and left it there. The reaction to Marcus's apology was not what he had expected. He had prepared himself for it to be ignored or mocked or used as more fuel for the pylon that had been running for 36 hours. Instead, something quieter happened. People read it. Some of them shared it. And a portion of the comments section, not all of it, not even most of it, but a meaningful portion, shifted. Several people who had been harshly critical said that the apology seemed genuine. A few noted how short it was and how that brevity was actually its strength. It did not wriggle or deflect or ask for understanding. It just admitted the thing clearly and left it there. One person wrote, "This is how you apologize when you've actually thought about it." That comment alone received several thousand likes. The story did not disappear. Stories like this do not simply disappear in the age of permanent online archives. The video existed, would continue to exist, and would occasionally resurface. Marcus knew this. But the apology had done something important. It had given the story a different ending. Instead of ending with a foolish tourist slinking away from London with nothing learned, it ended with something more complicated and more human. A person who had done something thoughtless, had seen himself clearly in the mirror of other people's reactions, and had said so out loud. He flew back to Toronto 3 days later. The conversation with his manager was difficult but survivable. His job was not lost, though his professional reputation had taken a hit that would take time to fade. His mother had a long talk with him on the phone that he found more uncomfortable than anything the Metropolitan Police had said, which is the particular power that mothers have in situations like these. In the months that followed, Marcus spoke about the incident a few times, not to media outlets, who he declined, but in private conversations with people he trusted. He talked about what it felt like to watch himself on video and not recognize the person he was looking at. He talked about the specific sensation of realizing that something you thought was harmless had real weight in the world. He talked about the guard, whose name he never learned, and the strange, humbling experience of watching someone maintain complete dignity in the face of being deliberately disrespected. He also quietly became someone who looked things up before he visited them, not out of fear but out of a changed understanding of what it means to walk into someone else's space and treat it like a backdrop for your own entertainment. London was not a stage set. The palace was not a prop. The guard was not a performer. These were real things, real people, real duties, and they had been real long before Marcus Reed arrived with his teacup and his phone. The guard, for his part, was never publicly named in connection with the story. He gave no interviews. He made no social media posts. He returned to his post, did his job, and continued doing it. If he was aware of how widely the incident had spread, and almost certainly he was, he showed no sign of it. He remained exactly what he had always been, a soldier standing his ground with a discipline that required no audience and asked for no applause. That, in the end, was perhaps the most important detail of the whole story. Not the tourist's mistake, not the internet's reaction, not even the apology, but the fact that a person can stand completely still in the face of mockery, say exactly what needs to be said at exactly the right moment, and then return to stillness, and in doing so, leave the person who tried to provoke them looking small, while making themselves look extraordinary without trying to at all. Marcus Reed had gone to Buckingham Palace looking for a moment that would make him interesting online. He found one. It just turned out to be the guard's moment, not his. And somewhere in London, at a post outside a golden gate on a wide, busy street, a soldier in a tall black hat stood perfectly still and stared ahead into the middle distance, unbothered, unbroken, exactly as trained. The tourists came and went. The cameras clicked. The city moved around him like water around a stone, and he stood there as he always did, as if no one was watching, and as if everyone was.